there, review family, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morse, the review guy, reviewing music for the love of music, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one, I'm going to be covering the new Tribulation record entitled Where the Gloom Becomes Sound. This is the 5th studio-length album by the Swedish band Tribulation. I was apprehensive about the hype going into this record, mostly due to buzz being a weary topic for me, and also because the single Hour of the Wolf was pretty underwhelming to me. However, much of that apprehension sort of faded away as I started to dig more into this record on repeated listens, dissecting it, as I think that this is the most mature, well-fleshed out, and well-defined Tribulation has sounded in a while, if ever. I am glad that they depart more and more from their initial roots as their records have progressed through their timeline. As this sound, this amalgamation of black metal and occult, classic heavy metal, psych, death metal, services them much better, basically gives them a lot of justice on a silver platter. This is like if Ghost was extreme metal. The sound here on this record is grim and dusty. This is like an ancient library that reaches hundreds of feet into the air past what you can see, full of personless hallways and lanterns dimly lighting it. Right out of the gate, I want to get one thing out of the way. I think the vocals are the weak part of this record, but I found myself a lot more enamored with this record instrumentally than vocally, and that sentiment could be shared with practically any track here for me. Through these 48 minutes, I found myself getting a little bit tired of how one note and at times boring the vocals can come across. The Dungeon Wretches play out as an accompaniment as opposed to a focal point, which is fine in most cases, but considering they do sit very on top of the mix in many ways with the reverb, they come across frigid even when they don't necessarily need to at a certain section. It pretty much all stays consistent. And that's another thing, consistency is fine, but on a case-by-case basis, if we're judging it on that, I definitely think the vocals are a weak point. The track Dirge of a Dying Soul specifically gives a great indication of how this record feels, how it sounds. As it might suggest, it's a dirge, a literal fucking lament. In this whole album, for the most part, even though it does quicken at times, feels like a lament. Even the faster sections can still feel like it is hopeless and devoid of any sort of purpose. It has that blissful emptiness. The swirling occultist meeting full of acolytes in black robes at the local graveyard, if you will. A musical palette extending its blackened tendrils all across the musical landscape, but still surprisingly able to tie all of it up in a bow in a cohesive manner. And the album continues to take on an underworld vibe. If you don't like, say, the first 3 tracks, I don't think the rest of the album is going to give you much, because through the technicality and the haze, the fogginess of this murky instrumentation and this low, dense riff playing and these dungeon vocals, it's a very consistent record, if nothing else. Its aesthetic is basically like fire and brimstone. Yet while this record does give off this aura of pure evil and malice and malevolence, there are always these shots of melodicism that get injected into the veins of this sound, even though it's already a very frantic style thematically, if not speed-wise, which that's not to say that this record doesn't speed up. It certainly does, but it never becomes too arbitrary that it has to. And while it might be garnering acclaim on practically all fronts from a lot of people, and I am praising it as well, I do think there are some glaring problems that I have trouble overlooking as I listen to this thing. Number one, as I said before, the vocals. They're not so much out of place. I don't want to make that my point. I just think that in comparison to everything else, they are practically boring. The more I listen to it, the less I am intrigued by the approach. They're waily, throaty, and impassioned, but incredibly one-dimensional compared to everything else that the band is able to put forth on this record. Great musicianship on tracks such as Daughter of the Jinn or In Anna get really undermined by how little the vocals do to bolster the tracks up in their own right. I wouldn't go so far as to say they are lackluster, but they really do fall short compared to everything else here. The Victorian interlude Left, I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, is very beautiful, but I just fail to see how it was necessary here. Taking into account the tracks that come before and after, specifically the ones that are directly before and after this track, it sort of leaves me thinking, like, why did this have to be here? It feels a bit mundane, it feels out of place, it's pretty, but it definitely does read like a band putting in an interlude just to have an interlude near the middle of the album, just for the sake of having that interlude there or padding out time. When done correctly, it can be great, but it feels horrendously out of place here. Now, these are obviously, in the grand scheme of things, nitpicks, because the thing that I want to highlight, if I have not already made it very clear, is the instrumentation is great here. The combination of all these influences coming into one is a very vivid picture that gets painted. It is fantastic what the band is able to do so meticulously and so carefully, blending in all of these styles, so you don't necessarily really notice just how much they are doing. It can seem like one beast, one product, one unit, but when you really amount it to everything that they are piling into their sound, this witch's cauldron of sort, that they are piling all these ingredients and stirring it around to make some alchemic concoction of some kind. That's basically what the sound here is. It is a lot of different things, and the more you know about the genres they're playing with, the more you will come to appreciate what they are doing instrumentally here. And when you combine that with it having a wonderful production backing it, although at times I think it can be a little bit too dense for its own good and too sounding sort of impenetrable for its own good. I think a little bit of audibility to bolster up how cold some of these tracks sound when it comes to the equalization and how just compressed and how pressed down some of these tracks can feel. That can be an issue, but it never really comes in the way of the enjoyment of the record, so much so that it becomes a huge major factor. Because otherwise, this record feels like a subterranean hellscape. You're stuck in the underbelly of the world with life forms and species you never knew and no one knew existed, and there's no light, and you're running out of oxygen slowly. It chokes you. It has the asphyxiation feeling that a lot of occult black metal type of bands have, but I don't really want to amount them to just solely one thing, because I think pigeonholing Tribulation into anything is an improper thing to do. So while this record does have shortcomings, there's nothing that is outwardly outright bad, something that is coming in the way so much of the enjoyment that it just ruins the experience all in all. I don't want to say that every issue that I have, every glaring mistake is forgettable. They definitely do impede some of the enjoyment and can service as these intrusive little blips on the radar that makes it difficult to really pierce past it. But spearheading this sound is a great band with some great musicians behind it that know what they are doing and obviously know the genres that they are playing with. I want to make it clear that even the things that I don't like on this record aren't necessarily bad. It doesn't make them bad. I don't think that Tribulation really has it in them to be bad. And in the future, on subsequent Tribulation albums in the future, I would love to hear them string together their ideas a bit stronger and maybe diversify vocals in a way that can stand out and sort of match the energy and the intensity and match the fantastic songwriting of everything else that is presented here. I'm going to be giving this album a 7 out of 10. And that is a wrap. Have you heard this new Tribulation record where the gloom becomes sound? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought about it. I would love to discuss this record with you. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morse, the Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.